The moment began without warning, inside a high-security federal prison yard late one afternoon. A corrections officer noticed a prisoner whispering urgently to three others in a corner where cameras barely reached. The group spoke in low voices, making hand motions and nods. Something didn't feel right, and it wasn't just another argument over cards or the mess hall line. One inmate was a known radical, and prison intelligence had flagged him weeks earlier for spreading extremist ideas. In that instant, the officer knew this could turn into something dangerous, something unseen by the public, but potent enough to inspire violence if left unchecked. Within minutes, a team moved in to separate the inmates and start questioning them. The prison's Counter-Radicalization unit, trained specifically for moments like this, took over. They watched video footage, reviewed the men's histories, and consulted with federal intelligence analysts to determine whether this was just rough talk or the start of something far worse. That quick recognition and response didn't happen by accident. It was the result of years of effort by U.S. authorities to detect and stop extremist behavior among the incarcerated population before it could spread or cross out into the free world. But as the team pulled the men apart and started asking questions, the air grew tenser. What they would find next would shock everyone and raise the stakes for how the prison system handles the threat of extremism moving forward. To understand that moment, we have to go back and see how the U.S. prison system came face to face with the danger of radicalization behind bars and how authorities have tried to stop it. For many years, U.S. prisons quietly held inmates convicted of terror-related offenses or linked with extremist ideologies. While the overall number of such prisoners was small compared with the total prison population, the possibility that these inmates could influence others was a real concern. Research into prison radicalization shows that extremist thinking does occur inside custody, and officials cannot simply assume it won't spread without monitoring and intervention. Correctional leadership began to infuse anti-radicalization policies into its system, aiming to make order and stability points of strength rather than weaknesses for extremist recruitment. Staff training increased, and new intelligence-gathering systems were developed so guards and prison workers could detect unusual patterns of behavior that might signal more than just boredom or mischief. The seeds of today's counter-extremist strategies were planted early, long before any high-stakes confrontation unfolded. One of the biggest challenges was understanding what to look for. Prison is already a difficult place where gangs, politics, and personal grievances mix. Officials realized that extremist inmates might try to recruit others subtly under the cover of regular prison conversations or religious gatherings. To tackle this, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the FBI, and other agencies began to work together more formally, sharing information and patterns they saw from outside investigations into terror plots. They also adopted intelligence systems inside facilities to watch for signs of influence and recruitment attempts, like sudden changes in group dynamics among prisoners or discussions about violence that didn't seem connected to ordinary prison grievances. These systems were designed to identify those at risk of radical thinking before it became a problem.
Beyond simply watching and reporting, correctional officials also took another approach: programming that gives inmates alternative activities and thinking skills. Studies and prison practice show that structured programs, including cognitive restructuring initiatives that help inmates change how they think and behave, reduce the appeal of violent extremist ideologies. These programs aren't advertised for public attention, but they play a role behind the scenes in reducing the chance that someone will embrace radical beliefs while locked up. By keeping inmates engaged in positive work and providing realistic paths forward once released, these efforts act as a quiet but important tool against extremism behind bars. Yet, even with all these measures in place, prison officials still face an uphill battle. That tense moment in the yard had revealed that, despite years of preparation, the threat of radical influence never goes away. And as the guards closed in to see what exactly the group had been plotting, a deeper question remained. Were they just talking, or was something darker beginning to take shape inside the walls? As the guards separated the group, one inmate suddenly slammed his hand against the metal table in the visiting area, shouting in a language only partially understood by staff. His eyes were wide, his voice trembling with anger and fear, and it was clear he was trying to send a message to someone outside the officer's line of sight. Every movement, every whisper was being carefully watched by the counter-radicalization team. They knew that even a small gesture could signal the start of a coordinated plan. The tension in the room was unbearable, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch. What had begun as casual conversation now looked like the early stages of a serious threat. After securing the inmates, officers began questioning them one by one. It quickly became apparent that this was more than idle chatter. One of the men had drafted notes outlining potential violent actions that could be carried out by others once released. Another inmate had been quietly trying to influence younger prisoners in the yard, spreading extremist ideas disguised as personal beliefs or religious discussions. Prison intelligence had caught fragments of this behavior before, but now it was all coming together, painting a picture of a small, informal network operating within the prison walls. Officials realized that without intervention, these inmates could have recruited others and built a real threat. This discovery was a turning point, but it also highlighted a larger truth. Preventing extremism inside custody was not just about watching and reporting. It required carefully designed programs to redirect inmates' attention, provide positive alternatives, and break the cycle of radical thinking. Across the country, the Federal Bureau of Prisons had started implementing these programs in high-risk facilities. They included educational courses, structured religious programs, and mentorship activities designed to challenge extremist narratives. Staff were trained to identify subtle signs of radicalization, unusual isolation, secretive communications, or attempts to influence other prisoners. These measures had prevented several plots in the past, but the work was never complete, and every new discovery reminded officials of the stakes.
Even with programs in place, officials knew that the most difficult challenges were often invisible. Extremist ideologies do not always appear in dramatic confrontations. They often start quietly, through conversations in the library, religious services, or cell blocks. Inmates might pass notes, smuggle books, or use coded language to communicate ideas that could inspire violence in the future. Detecting these activities required constant vigilance, sophisticated intelligence, and close cooperation with federal agencies. The prison where this incident occurred had recently upgraded its surveillance systems and introduced specialized monitoring teams specifically to catch these early warning signs. Without such systems, the network of radicals could have grown undetected, potentially spreading dangerous ideas to others inside and outside the facility. The investigation revealed another shocking element. One of the inmates had been communicating with individuals outside the prison through letters and other indirect channels, attempting to influence actions beyond the prison walls. This showed the complexity of the problem. Extremism in custody was not contained to the prison itself. It could reach communities, cities, and even entire regions if left unchecked. Officers and intelligence analysts worked tirelessly to trace the communications, intercept messages, and prevent any external harm. Every intercepted note or plan was a small victory, but the team knew that the threat would never fully disappear. It had to be managed continuously. By the end of the day, the initial alarm had been contained, but the prison staff were left with an uneasy realization. The fight against extremism inside custody was ongoing, unpredictable, and highly dangerous. Every gesture, every whispered conversation could hide something far worse. The counter-extremism programs were crucial, but even the best planning could not predict every move. As the officers escorted the inmates back to their cells, the shadows in the corners of the prison seemed heavier, the silence louder, and the sense of threat more real. One question lingered. What if these inmates had already influenced others before being caught? Could a spark of radical thought be growing elsewhere, waiting for the right moment to ignite? The tension did not end there. That very night, while most of the prison slept, a faint signal from one of the inmates' communications devices was detected by monitoring teams. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but enough to suggest that this network of radicals might not yet be fully under control. The officers and intelligence analysts knew they had a narrow window to act, and that any delay could have catastrophic consequences. The faint signal detected that night set off a flurry of activity in the prison. A specialized monitoring team worked quietly in a dimly lit room filled with screens and cameras, tracking every movement of the flagged inmates. The tension was palpable. Officers knew that even the smallest mistake could allow extremist activity to slip through the cracks. They watched as one inmate moved to a corner of the yard where he had previously whispered to others. Every step was analyzed, every hand gesture noted. This was no ordinary prison night. It was the front line of a fight most people would never see.
By early morning, the intelligence team had pieced together a disturbing picture. The inmate had attempted to relay instructions to associates outside using coded messages hidden in letters and legal paperwork. Federal agents were brought in immediately to intercept and analyze the communications. The combination of surveillance inside the prison and outside investigation revealed that the inmate was part of a broader network, albeit a small one, that could have posed a real threat if left unchecked. This was the culmination of months of counter-extremism work, testing the prison's security systems, intelligence capabilities, and staff vigilance. In the following days, prison staff implemented several interventions. The key extremist inmate was moved to a higher security unit, isolated from the general population to prevent him from influencing others. Other prisoners who had been drawn into his orbit were enrolled in structured rehabilitation programs, focusing on education, critical thinking, and de-radicalization. Mentors and counselors worked with them, emphasizing non-violent ways to handle frustrations and life challenges. Officers monitored them closely, watching for any signs that the ideology might take root again. For some prisoners, these programs were life-changing. For others, the pull of radical ideas remained strong, requiring ongoing surveillance. The success of this operation showed the importance of preparation and collaboration. The Federal Bureau of Prisons, intelligence agencies, and correctional officers had acted as a single unit, preventing a potential crisis before it could materialize. But officials knew that the work was far from over. Extremist thinking could emerge quietly in ways that no camera or patrol could immediately detect. The prison system had to remain vigilant, constantly updating strategies, training staff, and implementing programs designed to counter radicalization before it spread further. Even with all the measures in place, the case served as a reminder of the challenges authorities face. Extremism inside prisons is not always obvious. It can hide behind religion, personal grievances, or small group discussions. Detecting it requires sharp eyes, patience, and coordination between multiple agencies. But the stakes are high. One misstep could allow a radical idea to grow, potentially leading to violence both inside and outside the prison walls. The night's discovery had averted immediate danger, but it also revealed the fragile balance between order and chaos in the system. By the end of the week, the prison had returned to its usual rhythm, with inmates going through daily routines and guards performing their rounds. Yet a quiet tension lingered. Staff knew that extremism could flare up again at any moment, sparked by a single whispered conversation, a hidden note, or an unobserved gesture. The officers and intelligence analysts remained vigilant,
aware that each day presented a new challenge. In the shadows of the cells, extremist thoughts might still be circulating, but thanks to swift action and rigorous programs, the spark had been contained, at least for now.
As the sun rose over the prison walls, the team could finally breathe a little easier. But one question remained. How many more cells contained minds quietly plotting, waiting for the right moment? The fight against extremism in custody was ongoing, relentless, and far from over. And the next time a faint signal appeared, the prison staff would be ready, but only just. The following weeks were tense inside the prison. Guards remained alert, monitoring every corner and movement of inmates who had been identified as radicalized. Even small actions, a hand gesture, a whispered phrase, or a hurried glance were scrutinized. Intelligence analysts reviewed every communication that passed through the facility, knowing that extremists often find subtle ways to influence others. It was a reminder that countering extremism in custody was not a one-time effort. It was a constant, demanding vigilance every hour of every day. Meanwhile, the rehabilitation programs intensified. Inmates who had shown susceptibility to radical ideology enrolled in courses designed to challenge violent beliefs and promote critical thinking. They participated in group discussions, educational classes, and mentoring sessions with trained staff. The goal was to replace dangerous ideas with safer, constructive alternatives and to give prisoners hope for life after release. For some, this was a turning point, opening their eyes to the consequences of radical behavior and the paths available to them if they chose to change. But the challenge was not only internal. Authorities knew that extremist networks extended beyond prison walls. Communications with outside contacts had to be monitored carefully, intercepted when necessary, and investigated thoroughly. The prison worked closely with federal law enforcement agencies, sharing intelligence and coordinating actions to ensure that dangerous plans never left the facility. Every intercepted message was a victory, yet it was also a stark reminder of the potential risks that still lurked. One small oversight could unravel months of careful planning and intervention. The prison staff and intelligence teams also faced an unexpected challenge. Extremism does not always show itself through dramatic actions. It can hide in quiet corners, in the influence one prisoner has over another, in a small gesture that seems harmless at first. This subtlety made the work both exhausting and critical. Programs were adjusted continuously to address new patterns, and training sessions for staff were repeated frequently to sharpen awareness. The goal was to create an environment where extremist ideas had no room to grow, a constant effort to outpace those who sought to spread them. In the end, the prison's counter-extremism program proved successful in stopping immediate threats. No plots reached outside communities, and the inmate network was effectively dismantled. But the story left a lasting lesson. Extremism can never be fully eradicated in custody. It can be managed, monitored, and mitigated, but it requires relentless vigilance, cooperation between multiple agencies, and a commitment to rehabilitation as well as security. Every officer, analyst, and staff member played a part in keeping the system safe, showing that even in the most dangerous places, prevention is possible. As the chapter closes, the question remains: how many other prisons across the country face similar threats, quietly building and waiting for a moment to act? The fight against radicalization in custody continues every day, often unseen by the public, yet it is a battle that could not be more important. And as long as extremists exist, the prison walls will remain a front line in the ongoing effort to protect communities beyond them. The story of countering extremism in custody is not just about the events inside one prison. It is about the continuous vigilance, the careful programs, and the dedicated people working to ensure that radical ideas never become violent action. And while one chapter may end, the fight goes on,
silent, watchful, and unwavering.